The glass towers of Hanseong Corporation pierced Seoul's skyline like crystalline needles, reflecting the grey autumn clouds that mirrored Min Jun's mood. As CEO, he had built this empire from nothing, yet today felt hollow as he reviewed another stack of resumes for the cleaning position, a role he insisted on personally approving after recent security breaches. The elevator chimed softly as his assistant ushered in the final candidate. Min Jun glanced up from his mahogany desk, expecting another routine interview, but his breath caught. The woman before him was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features that spoke of quiet strength despite her obvious pregnancy. Her simple black dress was clean but worn, her posture straight despite the weight she carried. "Please sit." He gestured to the leather chair across from him, noting how she moved with careful grace. She settled slowly, hands folded protectively over her rounded belly. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Park." Her voice carried a musical quality that stirred something deep in his memory. Min Jun found himself studying her face more intently than professional courtesy warranted. There was something familiar about the curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head slightly when nervous. "Your application mentions no previous cleaning experience," he observed, though his usual stern interview demeanor felt forced. "I'm willing to learn. I need this job." Her honesty was refreshing in a world where people constantly performed for his benefit. As she shifted in her chair, adjusting her cardigan, a glint of silver caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Min Jun's eyes focused on the delicate chain at her throat, and his world tilted on its axis. The breath left his lungs as recognition crashed over him like a tsunami, threatening to drown him in memories he'd buried for 15 years. The necklace was unmistakable, a delicate silver chain holding a small pendant shaped like a crescent moon, with a tiny star nestled within its curve. Min Jun's hand unconsciously moved to his chest, where beneath his expensive shirt lay its matching piece, a sun pendant that completed the celestial pair. 15 years ago, he had been a different person entirely. Not the polished CEO in his glass tower, but a 17-year-old boy from the wrong side of Seoul, working part-time jobs to help his struggling family. That summer, he had met a girl at the community center where they both volunteered, a girl with eyes like starlight and a laugh that made him believe in possibilities beyond his circumstances. They had saved their meager earnings for weeks to buy the matching necklaces from a small jewelry shop in Hongdae, promising to wear them always as symbols of their unbreakable bond. He had given her the moon, keeping the sun for himself, joking that she was his guiding light in the darkness. "Your name," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "What's your name?" "So-young, Kim So-young." She looked puzzled by the intensity in his gaze, unconsciously touching the pendant as if sensing his focus on it. The name hit him like a physical blow. His So-young. His first love, his everything, until circumstances had torn them apart. Her family had moved suddenly that autumn, her father's job transfer, she had explained through tears as they said goodbye at the train station. They had promised to stay in touch, but life had other plans. Letters went unanswered, phone numbers changed, and eventually the pain of missing her had driven him to bury those memories deep. Now she sat before him, pregnant and alone, seeking employment as a cleaner in the very company he had built while trying to forget her. Min Jun forced his expression into neutral professionalism, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. So-young showed no sign of recognition, her focus entirely on the interview, on securing this job that clearly meant everything to her current situation. The years had changed him dramatically. Gone was the lean teenager with second-hand clothes and calloused hands, replaced by a man who commanded boardrooms and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The position requires early morning shifts, starting at 5 a.m., he said, testing her commitment while his mind raced. The work is physically demanding. Her hand moved protectively to her belly. I understand. I can handle it. You're expecting. When is your due date? The question was necessary for employment purposes, but hearing her answer would make this surreal situation feel devastatingly real. 3 months. Her voice carried a note of vulnerability she tried to hide. I know it's not ideal, but I'll work right up until I can't. I need the income. And where was the father? The question burned in his throat, but he couldn't ask, not as her potential employer, and certainly not as the boy who had once promised to love her forever. Instead, he found himself approving her application with a swift signature, his handwriting betraying none of the emotional earthquake occurring within him. You start Monday. Report to Mrs. Choi in Human Resources at 4:30 a.m. for orientation. Relief flooded her features, transforming them with a radiance that transported him instantly back to that summer when the world had seemed full of infinite possibility. Thank you so much, Mr. Park. You won't regret this. As she stood to leave, Minjun watched the way she moved, noting the careful way she protected her unborn child, the quiet dignity in her bearing despite her obvious financial struggles. The following Monday, Minjun found himself arriving at the office before dawn, something he hadn't done in years. His usual schedule began at 8 a.m. with coffee and financial reports, but today he needed to see her, to confirm that Friday's interview hadn't been an elaborate dream conjured by his overworked mind. The 42nd floor was eerily quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, lit only by emergency lighting and the distant glow of Seoul's never-sleeping cityscape. He made his way to his office, but instead of settling behind his desk, he found himself pacing to the windows, watching the parking garage entrance far below. At exactly 4:20 a.m., a small figure emerged from the subway entrance across the street. Even from this height, he recognized her careful gait, the way she paused to rest one hand on her lower back before continuing toward the building. The sight of her navigating the early morning darkness alone, pregnant and vulnerable, stirred a protective instinct he thought he'd lost years ago. Mrs. Choi, the head of janitorial services, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had worked for the company since its early days. Minjun had specifically requested that she personally oversee So Young's training, though he couldn't explain his unusual interest in a new cleaning employee without raising suspicions. Through his office's glass walls, he caught glimpses of So Young throughout that first week. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, arriving before the building truly awakened and working with quiet efficiency. Her supervisor reported that she was punctual, thorough, and never complained, despite the obvious physical challenges her pregnancy presented. On Thursday morning, Minjun deliberately timed his arrival to coincide with her shift. As the elevator doors opened on the 38th floor, he saw her kneeling beside a supply cart, carefully organizing cleaning materials. The sight of her on her knees, struggling slightly to maintain balance, sent a sharp pain through his chest. "Excuse me," Minjun's voice cut through the early morning silence, causing So Young to look up in surprise. She immediately began struggling to stand, her movements awkward due to her pregnancy. "Mr. Park, I'm sorry, I didn't expect—" "Don't get up," he said quickly, moving toward her. "Are you all right? Should you be kneeling like that in your condition?" Confusion flickered across her features at his concern. It was unusual for a CEO to show such personal interest in a cleaning employee's welfare, and they both knew it. "I'm fine, thank you. Just organizing the supplies." Minjun found himself extending his hand to help her up, and for a moment, their fingers touched. The contact sent electricity through him, the same spark he'd felt at 17 when they'd held hands for the first time. So Young's eyes widened slightly, as if she too had felt something, but she quickly looked away. "Perhaps we should assign you to lighter duties," he suggested, his voice more gentle than authoritative. Filing, organizing supplies from a seated position. Mrs. Choi can arrange something more suitable. I don't want special treatment, So Young replied with quiet dignity. I can do the job I was hired for. Her independence was admirable, but it frustrated him. He wanted to wrap her in comfort, to ensure she never had to worry about money or kneel on cold floors again. But he was her employer now, not the boy who had once carved their initials into a tree in Namsan Park. It's not special treatment, it's practical management. He softened his tone. The company has a responsibility to ensure employee safety. As he spoke, his eyes were drawn again to the crescent moon pendant resting against her collarbone. Did she ever think about the boy who had given it to her? Did she wonder what had become of him, or had those memories faded like old photographs left too long in sunlight? The adjustment to lighter duties came with an unexpected consequence. So Young now worked primarily on the executive floors, organizing files and maintaining the administrative areas where Min Jun spent most of his time. Their paths crossed with increasing frequency, each encounter a delicate dance of professional courtesy, masking deeper currents. She had a way of moving through spaces that made them feel more alive. The sterile corporate environment seemed warmer when she was present, arranging flowers in the reception area or ensuring the conference rooms were perfectly prepared for meetings. Min Jun found himself inventing reasons to walk past wherever she was working, drawn by an invisible thread he couldn't sever. "How are you settling in?" he asked one afternoon, finding her in the small break room reserved for support staff. She was sitting at the round table, eating a simple lunch of rice and vegetables from a container she'd brought from home. "Very well, thank you." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Would you like to sit? Though I suppose CEOs don't usually take breaks in the staff room." He sat, ignoring the truth of her observation. "How are you feeling? The pregnancy, I mean. Are you getting proper medical care?" The personal nature of his question clearly surprised her. "I'm managing. The local clinic has a payment plan." A payment plan. The words hit him like a slap. Here was the woman he had once loved, carrying a child and struggling to afford basic medical care, while he lived in a penthouse apartment and drove cars worth more than most people's homes. The injustice of it burned in his throat. And the father? The question escaped before he could stop it, too personal, too revealing. So Young's expression closed off slightly. "He's not in the picture." The simple statement carried volumes of pain, and Min Jun felt a surge of anger toward the unknown man who had abandoned her. At the same time, a selfish part of him felt relief that there was no one else in her life, no one standing between them and the possibility of... What? She didn't even remember him. As autumn deepened into winter, Min Jun found himself living a double life. By day, he was the composed CEO, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions in revenue. By night, he was a man haunted by the ghost of his teenage self, researching everything he could about pregnancy care and maternal health, as if knowledge could somehow bridge the gap between who he was and who he wanted to be for her. He began making subtle changes to So Young's work environment. A more comfortable chair appeared at her workstation. The break room was stocked with healthier snacks and prenatal vitamins, disguised as a general wellness initiative for all employees. He arranged for the company's health insurance to cover part-time employees, a policy change that benefited everyone, but was secretly designed with one person in mind. So Young accepted these improvements with gracious professionalism, never suspecting they originated from his personal concern for her welfare. She was too focused on her work, too determined to prove herself worthy of the job that represented her lifeline. One evening, working late as was his habit, Min Jun heard the soft sound of someone crying, Following the sound, he found So Young in the supply closet, sitting on a step stool with her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. So Young? He spoke her name softly, and she looked up with tear-stained cheeks, embarrassment flooding her features. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought everyone had gone home. What's wrong? He knelt beside her, abandoning all pretense of professional distance. It's nothing, just hormones. Pregnancy makes everything feel overwhelming sometimes. But he could see it was more than that. The weight of carrying a child alone, of working while pregnant, of facing an uncertain future, it was crushing her spirit, and he felt powerless to help without revealing the truth of their connection. You don't have to face everything alone, he said quietly, the words carrying more meaning than she could possibly understand. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Minjun's hand hovered near hers, wanting to offer comfort, but knowing that any gesture too intimate would cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. So Young wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. I should go home, she said, starting to stand. Let me drive you. The offer came out before he could consider the implications. That's not necessary, Mr. Park. The subway is fine. It's late, and you're pregnant. I insist. The ride to her apartment was a study in controlled tension. So Young sat in the passenger seat of his luxury sedan, clearly uncomfortable with the opulence surrounding her. She directed him through narrow streets to a modest neighborhood far from the gleaming towers of Gangnam, where she lived in a small apartment building that had seen better decades. Thank you, she said, as he pulled up to the curb. This was very kind of you. So Young, he said as she reached for the door handle, and something in his tone made her pause. If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. She studied his face in the dim light from the street lamp, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. But then she smiled politely and stepped out into the cold night air. Minjun sat in his car long after she disappeared into the building, staring up at the window where a light had appeared on the third floor. He was walking a dangerous line, letting his feelings influence his professional judgment. But as he watched her silhouette move past the window, he knew he was already too far gone to turn back. The boy who had loved her was still alive inside him, and that boy would do anything to protect her, even if she never remembered who he used to be. December brought Seoul's first snow, and with it, a crisis that would change everything. Minjun was in a board meeting when Mrs. Choi knocked urgently on the conference room door. Her face was pale with worry as she whispered something to his assistant, who immediately approached him. Sir, there's been an incident. One of the cleaning staff, Kim So Young, she collapsed in the 35th floor bathroom. The paramedics are here. Minjun's blood turned to ice. He excused himself from the meeting with barely controlled composure, but once outside the conference room, he ran to the elevator with his heart pounding against his ribs. The 35th floor was chaos. Paramedics, concerned employees, Mrs. Choi wringing her hands with worry. He found So Young on a stretcher, conscious but pale, one hand protectively cradling her belly while a paramedic checked her vital signs. Her eyes found his across the crowd, and he saw fear there, raw, primal terror for her unborn child. What happened? He demanded of the lead paramedic. Dehydration, exhaustion, possibly low blood sugar. She needs to get to the hospital for proper evaluation. I'm going with her, Minjun announced, ignoring the surprised looks from his employees. Sir, that's not, Mrs. Choi began. I'm going with her, he repeated with finality that brooked no argument. In the ambulance, So Young's hand found his, gripping it with desperate strength. The baby, she whispered. Please, the baby has to be okay. Everything will be fine, he promised, though his own fear threatened to choke him. You're both going to be fine. At the hospital, Min-jun paced the waiting room like a caged animal while doctors examined her. When the physician finally emerged, he delivered news that was both relief and wake-up call. Mother and baby were stable, but So-young was severely malnourished and exhausted. She needed rest, proper nutrition, and significantly less stress. "She's been pushing herself too hard," the doctor explained. "Working while pregnant requires careful balance. She needs support." Support. The word echoed in Min-jun's mind as he sat beside So-young's hospital bed, watching her sleep. She had no one, no family, no partner, no safety net, except a job that was slowly killing her. The time for maintaining professional distance had passed. So-young woke to find Min-jun asleep in the chair beside her bed, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of worried vigil. The sight of him there, having stayed through the night, stirred something deep in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way he looked at her, as if she mattered more than professional courtesy could explain. "Mr. Park?" Her voice was hoarse from sleep and dehydration. He woke instantly, leaning forward with concern etched in every line of his face. "How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Water? Should I call the nurse?" "I'm okay." She struggled to sit up, and he immediately moved to help her, his hands gentle but sure. "You didn't have to stay." "Yes, I did." The words carried a weight that made her study his face more carefully. There was something familiar about his eyes, something that tugged at memories she couldn't quite grasp. The way he said her name, the protective instinct that seemed to drive his actions. It all felt like déjà vu, like echoes of a dream she'd once had. "The doctor says you need to take better care of yourself," Min-jun continued. "You can't keep working the way you have been." "I need this job," she protested weakly. "And you'll keep it, but with modifications, reduced hours, lighter duties, and—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with a decision. "I'm arranging for the company to cover your medical expenses. Full prenatal care, delivery, everything." "I can't accept that. It's too much." "You can and you will." His tone brooked no argument, but then it softened. "So-young, you're not alone in this. You don't have to carry everything by yourself." The way he spoke her name with such tenderness, such familiarity, it sent a shiver of recognition through her. She found herself studying his features more intently, looking past the expensive haircut and designer clothes to the bone structure beneath, the shape of his mouth, the particular shade of brown in his eyes. "Have we met before?" she asked suddenly. "Before the interview, I mean. You seem familiar." Min-jun's breath caught, and for a moment she thought he might tell her something important, but then he smiled, a careful professional expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't think so. I would remember." The weeks following So-young's hospitalization established a new rhythm between them, a careful dance of professional courtesy, masking deeper currents. Min-jun had arranged for her to work reduced hours in a comfortable office space, handling administrative tasks that kept her seated and stress-free. The change came with a salary increase that he justified as a promotion, though they both knew it was charity, disguised as opportunity. So-young accepted these arrangements with grace, but Min-jun could see the questions in her eyes. His interest in her welfare went far beyond normal employer concern, and she was too intelligent not to notice. Yet she never pressed him for explanations, perhaps afraid that too much scrutiny might cause her good fortune to evaporate. The company's annual Christmas party provided an unexpected test of their carefully maintained boundaries. Min-jun typically made a brief appearance at such events before retreating to his office, but this year he found himself lingering, watching So-young from across the decorated conference room as she chatted with other employees. She wore a simple black dress that accommodated her growing belly, her hair swept up in an elegant style that revealed the delicate line of her neck. The crescent moon pendant caught the light as she laughed at something Mrs. Choi said, and Min Jun felt the familiar ache of longing mixed with the bittersweet joy of seeing her happy. "She's lovely," his assistant Miss Lee commented, following his gaze. "Very dedicated worker. Though I have to say, your interest in her welfare has been notable." Min Jun forced his expression into neutral professionalism. "The company values all its employees." "Of course," Miss Lee replied with the diplomatic tone of someone who knew better than to push further. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Min Jun found himself alone with So Young in the elevator. The space felt impossibly small, filled with the subtle scent of her perfume and the weight of everything they couldn't say. "Thank you," she said quietly as they descended, "for everything you've done. I know it's more than any employer would normally—" "You don't need to thank me," he interrupted, his voice rougher than intended. "Yes, I do." She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. "I just wish I understood why." The elevator stopped at the parking garage, but neither of them moved to exit. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and the weight of 15 years of separation. Min Jun's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where beneath his shirt lay the sun pendant he'd never been able to remove. "So Young," he began, then stopped, the words catching in his throat. "There's something you're not telling me," she said softly. "Something about the way you look at me, the way you say my name. It's like you're seeing someone else." The moment of truth had arrived, and Min Jun found himself paralyzed between the desire to reveal everything and the fear that doing so would shatter the fragile peace they'd built. But as he looked into her eyes, those same starlight eyes that had captured his heart at 17, he knew he couldn't continue living this lie. "Do you remember the community center in Mapogu?" he asked quietly. 15 years ago, there was a boy there, a volunteer who worked with you on the children's reading program." So Young's breath caught, her hand moving instinctively to her throat, to the pendant that had never left her neck in all these years. "Juna!" The childhood nickname hit him like a physical blow, carrying with it the weight of every memory he'd tried to bury. "You remember?" Oh my God. Tears spilled down her cheeks as recognition flooded her features. "You're him. You're my Juna." "I'm sorry," he whispered, reaching out to touch her face, to wipe away her tears. "I'm sorry I let you go. I'm sorry I couldn't find you. I'm sorry for everything." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as if trying to reconcile the boy she'd loved with the man before her. "I looked for you. After we moved, I tried to find you, but your family had moved too, and I didn't know." "I know. I looked too." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin, the reality of her presence. "I never stopped thinking about you." The elevator doors opened and closed, but they remained frozen in their bubble of rediscovered truth, two souls finding each other again across the vast distance of time and circumstance. The revelation changed everything and nothing. So Young still worked for his company, still carried another man's child, still lived in her modest apartment while he resided in luxury. But now the careful distance between them crumbled, replaced by the tentative rebuilding of a connection that had never truly been severed. They talked for hours that night, sitting in his car in the empty parking garage, sharing the stories of their separate journeys. Min Jun learned about her marriage to a man who had seemed kind but proved unreliable, who had left when faced with the responsibility of fatherhood. So Young heard about his relentless pursuit of success, driven by the need to become worthy of the love he'd lost, to build something substantial enough to weather any storm. "I kept the necklace," she whispered, touching the crescent moon pendant. "Even when I married him, I couldn't take it off. He asked about it once, and I told him it was from an old friend. I kept mine too." Min Jun pulled his own pendant from beneath his shirt, the sun catching the dim light of the parking garage. I told myself it was just jewelry, but I knew better. When he finally drove her home, the silence between them was different, comfortable, filled with possibility rather than tension. At her door, she turned to face him, her expression soft in the glow of the streetlight. "What happens now?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I can't lose you again." She nodded, understanding passing between them. There would be complications, the baby, their professional relationship, the vast differences in their current circumstances. But they had found each other again, and that felt like a miracle worth fighting for. Over the following weeks, they began to rebuild their relationship carefully, like archaeologists uncovering something precious and fragile. Minjun would visit her apartment in the evenings, bringing dinner and sitting with her as she rested, their conversations ranging from memories of their youth to dreams for the future. He was there when she felt the baby's first strong kicks, his hand on her belly as wonder filled his eyes. "Hello, little one," he whispered, and So Young's heart broke and healed simultaneously at the tenderness in his voice. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and the promise of new life. So Young's due date approached, and with it, decisions that would shape their future. Minjun had quietly arranged for the best obstetrician in Seoul to handle her delivery, had prepared a nursery in his penthouse apartment that he hoped she might one day see as home. But he was careful not to pressure her, understanding that trust, once broken by abandonment and disappointment, needed time to rebuild. Instead, he showed his love through actions, ensuring she had everything she needed, being present for every doctor's appointment, treating her unborn child as if it were his own. The night So Young went into labor, Minjun was in a board meeting when his phone buzzed with her text. "It's time." He left the conference room without explanation, his assistant scrambling to reschedule millions of dollars in negotiations as he raced through Seoul's traffic to reach the hospital. He found her in the delivery room, frightened but determined, reaching for his hand as another contraction gripped her. "I'm here," he promised, and meant it in every way that mattered. Hours later, as he held the tiny girl who had captured his heart before she'd even drawn her first breath, Minjun understood that some loves are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth rebuilding from the ashes of what was lost. "She's beautiful," he whispered, looking from the baby to So Young, who watched him with tears of exhaustion and joy. "What should we call her?" So Young asked. Minjun thought of their matching pendants, of the sun and moon that had kept them connected across 15 years of separation. "Biol," he suggested. "Star. She's our little star." A soul awakened outside the hospital windows, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. 3 hearts beat in rhythm. A family born not of blood alone, but of love that had endured, transformed, and finally found its way home. The CEO, who had given a cleaning job to a pregnant stranger, had discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as ordinary moments, and that the heart, once given truly, never forgets its way back to where it belongs.